My name is Elise Morgan, and I was born a disappointment, not because I did anything wrong, but because I wasn't Caleb. From the moment I could walk, I was being measured against a standard I had never agreed to. Caleb was the blueprint: star athlete, debate team captain, straight A student. He gave my father everything he wanted, a mirror image of himself. I was the smudged reflection in the background. A mistake of timing, an afterthought. At family dinners, my father would lean back in his chair, glass of scotch in hand, and say, "Caleb's presentation wowed the partners today. Could have let it blindfolded." Everyone would laugh, proud, loud, warm. Then he'd glance at me. "Elise, you still doing, what was it again? That tech stuff?" The way he said tech stuff, you'd think I spent my days sorting cables at Best Buy. It didn't matter that I was working on classified threat detection algorithms. It didn't matter that I'd been recruited right out of undergrad. All he saw was that I didn't follow his plan. No law school, no MBA, no boardroom. Just firewalls, just code, just me. When I told him I'd accepted a position with the Defense Cyber Unit, his reaction wasn't surprise. It was contempt. "So you're running from a real career now, hiding behind a screen like it's bravery?" My mother said nothing. She just cleared the plates. That night, I sat in my room listening to them celebrate Caleb's new office downtown. The walls felt thinner than ever. I could hear every word, every laugh, every glass clink. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pack a bag and never come back. Instead, I opened my laptop and worked until 3 a.m., perfecting an intrusion countermeasure protocol that would, months later, be credited with stopping an attack on a naval server cluster. No one in my family ever found out. They didn't ask. They didn't care. They already had their story. Caleb was the one who made the family proud. And me? I was the cautionary tale. They told me to be more like my brother, more polished, more proper, more acceptable. But I learned early on that approval from people who never tried to understand you is a poison gift. So I stopped chasing it. I built something of my own, brick by bloody brick. Not for recognition, not for revenge, for survival. But still, there's a part of you that remembers every word they said, every win they shrugged off, every time you walked into a room and they looked past you like you weren't even there. They thought they had me figured out, but that's the thing about shadows. They move quietly until the lights turn on. Success had a very specific shape in our house. Pressed suits, firm handshakes, business lunches at steakhouses, and a LinkedIn profile that read like a corporate ladder. My father didn't believe in passions. He believed in results, degrees, promotions, job titles that sounded impressive at cocktail parties. Anything else was just a hobby you hadn't grown out of yet. From the time I was 13, he told me I'd make a great attorney. "You're smart when you try, Elise. You just need direction." By direction, he meant the route he'd already mapped out: a political science degree, Columbia Law, a clerkship with one of his golf buddies, then a corner office, 2 kids, a golden retriever, and a mortgage in a zip code you could brag about. He used to walk into my room without knocking and scoff at the sketches taped to my wall or the code running on my screen. "You waste your time with this?" he'd ask, holding up a motherboard like it was a dirty sock. "You're too smart for this nonsense." My mother would step in with her soft-spoken diplomacy. "It's creative, James. Let her explore." He'd shake his head, already done listening. "The world doesn't pay you to explore, Margaret. It pays you to perform." And that was that. Every decision in our house had a return on investment attached to it. When Caleb declared he was going into finance, our father practically toasted to it like a royal decree. He brought home brochures for Ivy League schools and spreadsheets estimating Caleb's earning potential by age 35. He printed one out and left it on my desk, too. Something to consider. When I applied for a scholarship to study computer science, I didn't even tell him. What was the point? He found out anyway. Walked into the kitchen with the acceptance letter in hand and asked, "Cybersecurity? Is that even a real industry? You want to sit in a basement and play with passwords for the rest of your life?" I said nothing because I knew what he really meant. It's not prestigious, it's not elite, it's not his dream. My success would never count if it didn't look the way he imagined it. Wearing a badge meant nothing if it wasn't pinned to a suit. Writing code meant nothing unless it came with a bonus structure and an executive parking space. It wasn't just disapproval, it was erasure. He didn't argue with me. He dismissed me. The saddest part, I stopped trying to explain. You can only shout into silence for so long before your voice starts to give out. So I learned to nod, to smile, to play the dutiful daughter who was still figuring things out, all while building a career he'd never understand. And one day I knew he'd see that success doesn't need his permission to be real. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No slammed doors, no shouting match. Just a quiet click as I submitted the form, accepting the offer from the cybersecurity unit I'd interviewed with 2 weeks earlier. That one decision, made alone in my apartment with nothing but the hum of my laptop and a mug of lukewarm coffee, would shift the ground beneath everything my family thought they knew about me. They assumed I'd come around eventually, that after a few experimental years, I'd find my way back to something respectable. But I didn't want respectable. I wanted purpose, precision, pressure. I wanted to be in a room where people didn't care what school I went to or whether my last name carried weight. They just wanted results. I could deliver those. When I called my father to tell him, there was a pause on the line so long I thought he'd hung up. "You're joining what?" he said finally, the disgust thinly veiled. "It's a cybersecurity unit, government affiliated, classified work, national defense contracts." I kept my voice level, factual, hoping maybe the scope would impress him. "So, you're joining the military?" "Not exactly." "Elise." He said my name like a warning. "You do realize that once you go down this road, it's going to be very difficult to pivot back to something serious." I bit my tongue. He said serious the way people say sane. "I don't want to pivot," I said. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He exhaled sharply. "You had potential, real potential." It landed like a slap, had, past tense, like I'd thrown it away. "I still do," I said quietly. He didn't respond, just muttered something about needing to get back to a client call and hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat in my room packing a single duffel bag, wondering if I'd just walked away from my family for good. I wanted to believe they'd come around eventually, but I'd learned not to expect much from people who only saw you when you fit their blueprint. When I arrived at the training facility, no one asked who my father was. No one cared where my brother worked or what zip code I grew up in. They asked what I could build, what I could protect, what I could see that others missed. It was grueling, unforgiving, brilliant. And for the first time in my life, I felt useful. Not impressive, not admired, essential. And that was more powerful than any praise my father had ever withheld. The silence at the dinner table was louder than anything I'd ever heard. My mother poked at her roasted vegetables, not eating, not speaking. Caleb cleared his throat once, then again, like he was hoping someone else would step in. But no one did. The only sound was my father's knife tapping against the edge of his plate, rhythmic and sharp, like the ticking of a countdown clock. "So that's it then," he finally said, not looking at me. "You're throwing your future away." I didn't respond. I knew better than to defend myself. In this house, explanations were seen as excuses, and convictions were mistaken for rebellion. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my back straight. I had nothing left to prove to him. Not tonight. "I just don't understand how someone with your background, your education, could make a decision so—" He cut himself off, jaw tightening. "So beneath you." "It's not beneath me," I said quietly. He laughed once. "You think working behind a computer in some basement office makes you important? Elise, this is the real world, not a tech fantasy." "It's not a fantasy," I said, sharper now. "It's real work. It matters." "To who?" he snapped, eyes flashing. "To some government pencil pusher? That's not legacy, Elise. That's noise. Temporary. Disposable." Caleb shifted in his seat but stayed silent. Of course he did. He was always Switzerland, neutral, polite, untouchable. I caught my mother's eyes across the table. She looked tired, older somehow. "You raised me to be smart," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "To take initiative, to think critically, that's exactly what I'm doing." My father leaned back, crossed his arms, and shook his head like he was watching a slow-motion disaster. "No, I raised you to lead, and leaders don't run from structure. They don't throw away opportunities to chase fantasies. You had a seat waiting for you, an internship, a clear path, and you spit on it." "I didn't spit on anything," I said. "I chose a different path. That's not the same as failure." "To me it is," he said with finality. "And frankly, Elise, I'm embarrassed." The words hit harder than I'd expected. I felt them land in my chest like cold iron. Embarrassed, Not disappointed, not confused, embarrassed. Like I was something to be hidden, a shameful footnote in his otherwise polished family narrative. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping softly against the tile. "Thank you for dinner," I said to my mother. She didn't respond. I walked out without looking back. If I stayed a second longer, I would have shattered. That was the last time I ate at my parents' table, and the first time I realized that some people will never love you unless you become their idea of you. But I was done trying to fit someone else's reflection, especially when I'd already started building my own. I left before sunrise. No dramatic farewell, no speech about finding myself. Just a note on the kitchen counter tucked beneath the edge of the fruit bowl. "Thank you for everything. I'll be in touch when I'm settled." The lie sat neatly between the bananas and the silence. I stood in the hallway for a moment listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no doors creaking open, no one waiting to stop me. I had packed the night before, one suitcase, my laptop bag, and the weight of 1,000 unspoken conversations. My room still smelled like lavender from my childhood pillow spray, and I hated that. I hated how even the air tried to soften the blow. Downstairs, the house was still. My mother's scarf hung on the coat rack, like always. My father's briefcase sat by the door, polished and full, like him. And on the wall, the family photo we'd taken 5 years earlier stared down at me. Caleb in the middle, my father's hand proudly on his shoulder. Me, slightly off to the side, smiling too hard. I took one last look and opened the door. The morning air was cold enough to sting. My breath came out in clouds, but inside, everything was quiet, focused. I opened the trunk, loaded the bags, and slid behind the wheel. For a second, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Not from fear, not even from sadness. From pressure, from restraint, from the slow realization that I wasn't coming back. Not like this. When I started the engine, the house stayed dark. No curtain pulled back, no door opening in regret, just silence. And I realized something. They wouldn't chase me, because to chase someone, you first have to believe they're worth following. My phone buzzed once as I pulled onto the main road. A message from Caleb. "Drive safe." That was it. No call, no apology for standing by while our father tore into me. Just 2 words to clear his conscience. I muted the thread. I didn't cry. I had cried enough over people who only knew how to love me conditionally. I had spent years trying to earn nods, earn pride, earn space in conversations that never had room for me, but not anymore. I was done asking for permission to exist. As the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, a strange calm settled over me. Heavy, but clean, like shedding something that had never truly fit. I whispered the words I never had the courage to say aloud in that house. "I'll succeed, even without your support." And for the first time in years, I actually believed it. Washington, D.C. was colder than I expected. Not the weather, though that didn't help, but the way the city felt when you arrived with nothing. No friends, no family, no one waiting at the train station. I stepped off that platform with a duffel bag and a job offer that barely covered rent, clinging to the belief that purpose could make up for the rest. My apartment was on the 5th floor of a building that smelled like mildew and forgotten dreams. The elevator didn't work, so I hauled everything up the stairs, alone, pretending the burn in my legs was progress. The unit itself was a box. A creaky twin bed, a chipped countertop, a window that overlooked a brick wall. No furniture, no TV, no comfort, just walls and silence. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the cracked ceiling for what felt like hours. The walls didn't care that I had walked away from everything. They didn't care about my father's voice echoing in my head. "You'll regret this? You'll come crawling back." I didn't even have enough dishes to make a real meal that night, just a plastic fork and a microwave dinner from the 7-Eleven down the block. I ate it cross-legged on the floor, laptop open in front of me, rereading the onboarding packet for my new job. Lines of protocol, acronyms, expectations. It all felt impossibly big, and I felt small. The first day at the office was worse. I walked in with stiff shoulders and a blazer that didn't quite fit, surrounded by people who spoke in fast, clipped sentences full of technical jargon and inside jokes I wasn't part of. No one introduced me, no one cared. I was just the new girl, given a desk, a login, and a vague sense of being tolerated. I spent the first week in survival mode, Googling acronyms under the desk, smiling too much in meetings, staying late to fix mistakes before anyone noticed. I was terrified of being found out, that maybe my father had been right all along. that maybe I was in over my head. On the third night, I broke down in the stairwell. Quiet, fast tears, the kind you wipe away before they stain your pride. I called no one. I told no one. I just sat there, pressed against concrete, trying to remember why I had come. And then I did, because I wasn't chasing comfort. I was chasing something real, something mine. Starting from scratch wasn't failure, it was proof that I was willing to build a life, brick by brick, even if no one handed me the blueprint, even if I had to do it alone. Mentors and hard lessons. Her name was Lita. No one dared call her by her last name, not even the directors. She was sharp, unsparing, and always carried herself like she'd just walked out of a classified briefing. People didn't talk much when she entered a room, they adjusted posture. I was terrified of her. She was one of the senior analysts in our cybersecurity division, and somehow I ended up reporting to her. On my first day under her wing, I crashed the local server sandbox during a simulation test. I expected to be fired. Instead, Lita just raised an eyebrow. "You panicked," she said. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but she cut me off. "Don't. It's not an insult, it's a diagnosis." That was the first lesson. Over the next 3 months, she threw me into the fire. Assignments beyond my pay grade, threat analysis that kept me up all night, and field simulations with senior staff who questioned why I was even in the room. Lita never answered them. She just kept sending me in. "You have instincts," she said once after I flagged an anomaly no one else noticed. "Not everyone does. Trust them." I didn't trust myself yet, but she did, and that terrified me more than failure. One night after I pulled a 17-hour shift trying to trace a digital breach through layers of decoys and false flags, she slid a protein bar across the desk and sat next to me. "You don't need to be the smartest," she said. "You just need to see what others don't. You're good at that. Learn to sharpen it." That was when I realized something. She wasn't just training me to survive here, she was preparing me to lead. The first small win. The breach report went out at 2:13 a.m. I was the one who caught the pattern. A ghost signature hidden inside a corrupted data batch. It had been buried under thousands of files, subtle enough to pass as background noise. I flagged it, built the trace, confirmed the point of origin, and filed it with my team lead. 6 hours later, my name was on the internal newsletter. Rising analyst Elise Morgan identifies key threat vector in simulated attack. It was a small column near the bottom of the bulletin, but I took a screenshot anyway. Later that night, I texted my mother a photo. She read it. She didn't respond, not even a thumbs up. A week later, my father called, not to mention the article, not to say he'd heard anything, just to ask if I had reconsidered taking the LSATs. He said there was still time to make something real of myself. I almost laughed. Instead, I just listened, letting his words wash over me like rain on glass. They still didn't see it, but the people who mattered, the ones in the rooms I wanted to be in, they did. That would have to be enough. For now, I missed Caleb's wedding. The invitation had arrived late, probably not by accident, and the ceremony fell during a multi-week red team operation I couldn't step away from without risking a cascade of security breaches. When I called to explain, my mother sighed like I told her I wouldn't be attending my own funeral. Caleb was polite, said he understood, but in his voice was that familiar tone, the one he used when I was 15 and forgot his debate finals. "Of course you're too busy." I sent a gift, a handwritten card, and a carefully worded email. I got a photo in return, him and his bride, no message, just the image. Smiling, beautiful, complete, without me. I missed other things too. Birthdays, dinners, the arrival of my cousin's baby. I missed the funeral of a high school teacher who once told me I could change the world. I watched the live stream from a secure facility in Colorado with a cold sandwich in my lap. I cried in the server room when no one was looking. The loneliest part wasn't the missing. It was the silence that followed. No one called to say they wished I'd been there. No one asked how I was holding up. They stopped inviting me altogether, as if I'd chosen distance because I didn't care. But I did care. I cared every time I walked into an empty apartment, set my bag down, and stood there wondering when it would feel like home. I cared every time I poured a glass of wine alone on a Friday night while watching Caleb's newest post rack up comments from cousins who hadn't messaged me in years. Some nights I'd scroll through old texts, hovering over my mother's number with a thumb that never quite pressed call. Because what would I say? That I was tired? That I hadn't slept in 30 hours? That I'd stopped recognizing my own reflection under fluorescent lights and dry shampoo? Would she understand that I didn't even remember what my own laugh sounded like anymore? That sometimes, late at night, I replayed our last dinner over and over, wondering if I should have just nodded, smiled, and followed the path laid out for me. But I always came back to this. I was building something, not for their approval, not for applause, but because someone needed to do this work, and I could. I wanted to. And if the cost was silence, solitude, and a chair left empty at every holiday table, then so be it. Purpose has a price. I paid it in full. The house smelled the same, lemon polish and overcooked chicken. Even after all these years, nothing had changed. Same photos on the wall, same worn rug in the hallway, same tired clock ticking in the corner like it was measuring every second I had wasted trying to be seen here. I stood just inside the doorway, suitcase still in hand, waiting for someone to greet me. Caleb's voice rang from the kitchen, laughing, confident, belonging. "Oh, Elise," my mother said when she finally looked up. "You're early." It wasn't a welcome, it was a correction. I set my bag down by the stairs. "Good to see you too." She kissed my cheek lightly and returned to stirring something in the pot like I hadn't just crossed 3 time zones to get here. My father didn't even look up from his laptop at the dining table. Just muttered, "Hope traffic wasn't bad." "No, it was fine," I said. It was a lie. My flight had been delayed. My rental car reeked of cigarettes. I'd barely slept the night before. But none of it mattered here. In this house, I was a background character in someone else's story. Dinner was loud and crowded. Caleb and his wife had arrived with news of a new promotion. Something about an executive title that made my father beam with the kind of pride I had only ever seen directed at other people. My mother gushed. My aunt clapped. Even my younger cousins asked questions about his office, his bonus, his parking spot. When someone finally asked what I'd been working on, it wasn't curiosity. It was filler. A polite obligation between Caleb's Hawaii trip and the new countertops in my parents' kitchen. "Still doing that tech thing?" my uncle asked, reaching for more potatoes. I nodded. "I'm with a federal cybersecurity unit now. We're heading a new joint task force." "Wow," he said, eyes already shifting away. "Sounds complicated." The conversation moved on. I looked around the table, trying to remember why I'd come, why I'd booked a flight, requested time off, bought a bottle of overpriced wine as a peace offering. I had imagined, maybe foolishly, that things would feel different now. That time, distance, and all the quiet things I'd achieved might have reshaped the way they saw me. But no, I was still Elise, the one with the strange job and the inconvenient silence, the one who never quite fit into the photo frame. I excused myself before dessert and stepped out onto the porch. The air was colder than I expected, sharp, like memory. Behind me, laughter spilled from the house, warm and effortless. I sat on the swing alone, staring out at the street, and whispered to no one. "It's fine, I'm used to it." But that night, I slept with my suitcase still zipped, ready, because some homes you visit not to return, but to remind yourself why you left. It started with an email. No subject line, just a single line of text in the body. "We need to talk, secure line only." At first, I thought it was a prank or a mistake, but the sender address was from a military domain I recognized, one I wasn't supposed to be hearing from unless something serious had happened. My heart kicked once in my chest, then again. I followed protocol, called in through the encrypted line, and waited. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Anders. I'd heard of him, everyone had. He didn't speak in full sentences, only in facts. "You've been flagged for a critical contract assessment. Domestic front, Cyber Command. It's classified. We'll brief you in DC, 0700 Monday." That was it. No explanation, no invitation, just an order dressed like a favor. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't tell anyone. I packed in silence, heart pounding with something between terror and awe. The kind of moment you spend your whole life preparing for but never expect to actually come. When I arrived at the facility, I was escorted through 3 security checkpoints, each more unnerving than the last. Inside the operations center, a dozen high-ranking officials sat around a table, their uniforms crisp, their faces tired. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't smile. A projector flickered to life. The screen filled with cascading code, red flags, breach indicators, threat matrices, and then my name. Analyst Elise Morgan, Anders said, nodding at me. Your work flagged a pattern we missed. That pattern aligns with activity connected to a known foreign threat actor. We believe you're looking at the front end of a coordinated infiltration attempt. I stared at the data, my breath caught. He was right. The symmetry, the latency shifts, the signature compression, they were all there. We want you leading the security framework review for Project Aegis, he said. You'll liaise with the defense contractor developing our next-gen systems. You'll have clearance, budget control, sign-off authority. I blinked. Me? He didn't flinch. Your instincts got us here. We trust them to take us the rest of the way. By the time I left that meeting, I wasn't the same person who had walked in. My badge had been upgraded, my access changed, and somewhere in that stack of documents they handed me was the contract. $1.2 billion, years of development, and the future of national cyber defense. It was everything I'd worked for, every sleepless night, every missed dinner, every lonely step outside the blueprint. And the wildest part? The contractor on the other end of the deal, the company I would now oversee, was Pinnacle Systems, my father's company, the same one he used to say was too big, too important for someone like me to ever be a part of. He was right about one thing, it was too important. That's why they gave it to me. Leadership didn't arrive like a promotion. It came in pieces. Quiet moments, long nights, hard choices no one else wanted to make. It came the first time someone turned to me in a crisis and waited for instruction. It came when I stopped apologizing for being the one with the answers. After Project Aegis was handed to me, everything accelerated. I wasn't just writing code anymore. I was signing off on protocols, managing teams, briefing generals. People twice my age started calling me ma'am, not out of politeness, but because they had to. Because I outranked them in responsibility, if not years. At first, I felt like I was pretending. Sitting in those rooms, staring at walls lined with medals and flags, part of me still wondered if I belonged. But then the questions started coming to me first. Not Anders, not the division chief. Me. They'd say, "What's your call, Morgan?" And I'd give it. Clear, direct, no stammering, no shrinking. Because hesitation in this world gets people hurt. One night, after a 14-hour review session, a young analyst knocked on my office door. She looked like I had months ago, tired, second-guessing herself, clutching a report like it might save or destroy her. "I'm not sure if this matters," she said, handing it to me, "but something doesn't feel right in the test data." I read it. It was sharp, thorough, intuitive. I looked her in the eye and said, "You were right to flag this. Good work." She looked like she might cry. No one had ever told her that before. And suddenly I saw it. I wasn't just rising through the ranks for myself. I was opening doors behind me. I started leading strategy meetings. I conducted risk assessments on systems that protected entire federal infrastructures. When pushback came, I didn't flinch. I had numbers. I had insight. I had a spine made of every year I'd been told I wasn't enough. And slowly, without ceremony or spotlight, I stopped needing anyone's permission to take up space. I was no longer Elise, the tech girl with a point to prove. I was Elise Morgan, division lead, trusted, respected, listened to. Even my old mentor, Lita, started deferring to me in meetings. "You've come a long way," she said once, arms crossed, amused. "Didn't think you'd get here this fast." "I did," I said. She nodded. "Good, you'll need that certainty, especially tomorrow." Because tomorrow, I'd be walking into Pinnacle Defense Systems, not as a daughter, but as the woman in charge. And for the first time, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The meeting was supposed to be routine, a debrief on vulnerability testing, a few updates on countermeasure simulations, then back to the grind. I didn't expect her to be there. CEO Shannon Whitaker wasn't the type to sit in on mid-level briefings. She ran half the nation's defense tech infrastructure and had entire teams reporting to her through layers of filtered information. She didn't usually deal with people like me, but there she was. Sleek black suit, no clipboard, no entourage, just watching. I didn't let myself look at her while I presented. I focused on the screen, on the numbers, the graphs, the data that I knew inside and out. Every line of it had passed through my hands at least twice. I laid out the risks, the predicted breach vectors, and the mitigation plans with a calm I had earned through fire. When I finished, the room fell quiet. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else scribbled something down. But Shannon just nodded once and said, "You wrote those countermeasures yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're Elise Morgan?" I am. She stood, stepped forward, and extended her hand. Good, I've been hearing your name more and more. About time I saw the work for myself. Her grip was firm, her eyes sharp. I felt like I was being measured by someone who understood exactly what weight I was carrying and how rare it was to carry it well. She didn't let go right away. Your pattern recognition in the July intercept, that was you too, wasn't it? Yes. She smiled. That one bought us weeks. Weeks matter more than headlines. There was something in her voice, not just respect, but recognition. She didn't care about my age or my gender or what school I came from. She cared that I delivered. After the meeting, one of her assistants handed me a card. Simple, matte black, no logo, just a direct number. She wants you on the Aegis contract full time, he said. You'll lead the security alignment side, from the military end. My throat went dry. You sure that's not a mistake? I asked. He just smiled. She doesn't make those. When I got back to my desk, I stared at the card for a long time. People like Shannon didn't notice people like me, unless there was something undeniable, something they couldn't ignore. And now she had noticed, not because I asked to be seen, but because I made myself impossible to overlook. For the first time in years, I felt the ground shift under me, not in fear, in power, and I stood taller. It landed on my desk like any other assignment, just a manila folder with a label. Project Aegis, Phase 2 transition. Inside, timelines, architecture plans, contractor lists, encrypted memos. And then I saw it. Primary civilian contractor, Pinnacle Defense Systems. For a moment, the words didn't register. They just sat there, clean and clinical, until the recognition hit like a slap. I flipped to the personnel directory, scanned the list of key contacts. There it was, Albert Morgan, Director of Regional Operations. My father. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, trying not to laugh. Of all the companies, of all the branches, of all the timing. Now, after everything, after the years of silence, the half-hearted calls, the dinners that left me hollow, I would be overseeing the security compliance of his project. Mine would be the signature on every clearance, every technical spec, every system protocol. I'd be the one reviewing his work. The irony was so sharp it almost felt cruel. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in bed staring at the dark ceiling, remembering the things he used to say. You're smart, Elise, but smart doesn't mean much if you waste it. Pinnacle hires the best. You'll never get in without real-world experience. You should have taken the job I lined up for you. He used to say those words like scripture, as if his way was the only one. Now I'd be sitting across the table from him as the government liaison with final authority over the very system his team was building. When I informed General Grant of the connection, she didn't even blink. As long as you can remain impartial. I can, I said. Good, then proceed. And don't hold back. This contract is too important for family diplomacy. She didn't have to tell me twice. The following week, I reviewed the travel itinerary and noticed the on-site visit was scheduled for Monday. I could have sent someone else in my place, coordinated remotely, stayed invisible, but I didn't. I wanted to be in the room. I needed to see their faces when they realized. Not out of spite, but because for the first time, I wouldn't be the daughter trying to earn a place at their table. I'd be the woman holding the blueprint, and they'd have to answer to me. He stood at the front of the conference room, sleeves rolled just enough to show off his watch. The same one I remembered from when I was a kid. Polished, heavy, expensive. He was laughing with a few engineers, running through slides, all confidence and control. He had no idea I was in the building. They had flown me in under full discretion. No announcements, no press, just a quiet note from Shannon Whitaker's office. The liaison will arrive Monday at 0800. Prepare accordingly. My father didn't prepare for me. I stood behind the mirrored glass outside the room and watched him as the team set up. He was explaining timelines, referencing deliverables, flexing his authority in the only world he'd ever respected. He looked comfortable, powerful even, and so unaware. He kept talking about the liaison as if I were some faceless bureaucrat, someone he'd charm, impress, manage. I could almost hear his voice in my head. They always send someone mid-level, civilian types. You just have to speak their language. I used to think he didn't know me. Now I realized he never tried to. He hadn't changed, not really, still standing in the center of his own universe, certain that anything outside his orbit was irrelevant. I wondered how long it would take before that changed. I didn't knock when I entered. I didn't need to. The room quieted almost instantly. A few people straightened in their chairs. My father didn't look up right away. He was too busy adjusting the projector. Then he turned and froze. He blinked once, like his brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. "Elise?" he said slowly. "What? What are you doing here?" I stepped forward, not smiling. "I believe I'm here for the Project Aegis review. You got the memo, didn't you?" Someone coughed awkwardly. The head engineer, a woman named Monroe, stood quickly. "Director Morgan, this is our military liaison." There was a beat, then another, and then his face dropped. He started, but the words stuck. "Yes," I said evenly. "I'm the one overseeing your division's implementation of the cyber defense protocols." His mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time in my life, I watched my father become speechless. Monroe gestured to a seat prepared at the front. "Colonel Morgan, we're ready when you are." I walked past him without breaking stride, took my place, set down my folder, looked up. "Let's begin." And just like that, the balance shifted. Not in anger, not in revenge, just reality finally catching up. The dining table was too small for the weight of everything left unsaid. The roast was overcooked, the wine too warm. My mother had set the table like it was still 2009. Folded napkins, candles she never lit, mismatched serving dishes that had seen more awkward silences than meals. Caleb and his wife sat across from me, glowing in the golden light like a magazine ad for suburban success. She wore pearls. He talked about quarterly growth metrics like they were gossip. My father carved the roast with surgical precision, as if he could control the mood through symmetry. He hadn't spoken much since the shock in the conference room earlier that day. But tonight, he was trying to pretend, trying to reclaim control through routine. "So, Elise," Caleb said, slicing into his meat, "still in cyber stuff mode?" I nodded. "Something like that." "You've always been a mystery," my mother added, pouring herself more wine. "You never really explained what you do." "I tried," I said. "No, you described it," she corrected. "But you never made it relatable. You know, something we can understand." Caleb chuckled. "Yeah, you always did speak in riddles. Meanwhile, Pinnacle's been booming. They're saying this defense contract could change everything." "I've heard," I said, stabbing at my potatoes. My father finally looked up. "The liaison arrives tomorrow, high ranking, according to Shannon. This deal's make or break for the division." "Think they'll send someone serious this time?" Caleb asked. "Last liaison we had was fresh out of grad school. Nice guy, useless." My mother laughed softly. "I just hope it's not one of those overly rigid military types. They always act like they're above the rest of us." "I'm sure it'll be someone perfectly adequate," my father said, "as long as they stay out of the way." I set down my fork. "Why would you assume that?" I asked. They all looked at me. "Well," Caleb said, "you know how it is. Military people follow rules. We innovate, they regulate. It's a different mindset. I'd argue there's discipline in both." "Sure," my father said, "but there's a reason private sector leads the future. The military follows, adapts. That's not a criticism, it's just how it works." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I wiped my mouth with the napkin and smiled. "Well, maybe this time we'll surprise you." "Doubt it," my mother said, already pouring more wine. "Pinnacle always ends up carrying the heavy load." I stood up. "Elise," my father said, surprised, "we're not done." "I am." I walked away from that table, just like I had years ago. Only this time, I wasn't carrying shame on my back. I was carrying truth, and tomorrow they'd choke on it. After dinner, we drifted into the living room as if muscle memory had taken over. Same sagging couch, same dusty bookshelf, same conversation too. Caleb leaned back, arm draped over the cushion like he owned the air. "Shannon's expecting a big presentation tomorrow. Dad's been rehearsing it for days." "I wouldn't call it rehearsing," my father said with a dry smile. "I'm just prepared. That's what 30 years in the industry does, gives you instinct." "Plus," my mother added, "you know this project better than anyone. You helped build the foundation before Elise even knew what a server was." I said nothing. My father poured himself a splash of scotch. "The military's presence is mostly symbolic anyway. They sign the checks and approve what we've already decided. It's how these things work. They don't really lead." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. I stared at the crack in the coffee table. the one I'd accidentally made when I dropped a chemistry textbook back in high school. Caleb got a new desk when he aced his AP physics exam. I got told to be more careful. You know, my father continued, swirling his glass. I'm sure whoever they send will be perfectly competent. But this isn't their world. They just don't think on the same level. The liaison might surprise you, I said evenly. He shrugged. Doubtful, no offense, Elise, but the military isn't exactly known for innovation. Structure, sure, chain of command, but strategy? That's what we do. I wanted to say something, to shake the glass from his hand, to shout that I had built the very protocol that his company was now racing to understand. That the liaison he was so casually dismissing was sitting 10 feet from him, biting her tongue because every part of her had spent a lifetime learning how not to escalate. Instead, I stood. I've got work to review. Big day tomorrow. Caleb raised an eyebrow. What are you even working on these days? Still doing what? Software testing? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Something like that. My mother gave me that familiar look, the soft, rehearsed pity that said you could have had more. And maybe I could have, if more meant becoming someone they understood, someone easier to explain at dinner parties. But I had chosen something they couldn't define, and because of that, they refused to value it. Still the outlier. Still the one they spoke around not to. Still the daughter they introduced with a half apology. Still the embarrassment. Until tomorrow. The house was silent by the time I climbed the stairs. Lights off, doors shut, the same stillness I remembered from childhood, the kind that always felt heavier than peace. I closed the door to my old bedroom and leaned against it, letting the quiet press in around me. Everything was frozen in time. Posters I never took down, a cracked mirror above the dresser, the bookshelf filled with trophies that hadn't mattered to anyone but me. I opened my travel bag slowly, like I was peeling back layers of the last 10 years. The uniform was folded precisely, every crease sharp, every pin exactly where it belonged. It felt heavier now, not from fabric, but from everything it had come to mean. I hung it on the back of the closet door, let it breathe, let it own space. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the insignia on the collar. The eagle glinted faintly in the dim light. Full Colonel, clearance level Omega, authorized signatory for the largest cybersecurity contract in the department's history. And yet, at dinner, I was still just Elise. The old anger threatened to rise, but I didn't let it. Not tonight. Tonight wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming something. They had tried to define me by what I didn't become. I hadn't followed the script. I hadn't stepped into the polished law career, the ready-made internship, the path laid brick by brick in my father's image. I had chosen chaos, risk, silence, long hours in rooms where no one remembered my name, until they had to. I had built myself in the shadows, and tomorrow I'd step into the light they'd always denied me. Not to prove them wrong, but to show them what had always been true. I reviewed my briefing notes again, though I knew them by heart. I had memorized every phase of the rollout, every vulnerability, every patch, every decision point. I didn't need reassurance, I needed clarity. This wasn't just a meeting, it was the unveiling of a truth long buried under their expectations. I walked to the mirror. My reflection looked calm, composed, foreign. Not the girl who once cried in this room after being told she wasn't meant for leadership. Not the girl who overheard her father telling guests that Elise was still finding herself. She was gone. In her place stood a woman they would no longer be able to ignore. I turned off the light and whispered to the dark, "Let them see me." Tomorrow they would. The lobby was quiet, polished, and humming with the low murmur of corporate tension. People moved with purpose, clipped heels, murmured updates, coffee cups clutched like shields. I stepped through the glass doors in full uniform, midnight blue, brass buttons, the silver eagle on my collar catching the light like it knew this moment was waiting for me. At first, no one noticed, but then a young receptionist glanced up and froze. Her eyes widened just slightly, posture snapping straight before she quickly stood. "Good morning, Colonel," she said, voice steady but hands slightly shaking. "We've been told to expect you. You're early." "I like to be." She nodded and reached for the phone. "Security will escort you to the executive level unless you prefer, I know the way." I walked past her before she could respond, the tap of my boots echoing against the marble floor. Conversations dimmed as I passed, heads turned, people stepped aside, not because of fear, but because of what the uniform meant. What I meant, I took the elevator alone. The mirrored walls reflected someone I barely recognized. A woman who looked unshakable. Not cold, not arrogant, just solid. I adjusted my collar, took a breath, and reminded myself I wasn't here to prove anything. I already had. The doors opened with a soft chime, and there he was. My father stood down the corridor, talking to two engineers. Same button shirt, same cufflinks. He gestured as he spoke, confident and sure like always. I walked toward them slowly, deliberately. He didn't look up, but the engineers did. Their conversation faltered. One of them straightened, the other cleared his throat. My father followed their gaze. When he saw me, he paused, a half beat, a flicker of confusion. Not because he didn't recognize me, but because the version of me standing there didn't fit the one he kept in his head. Elise? Colonel Morgan, I corrected gently, not unkindly. I'm here for the Aegis briefing. He blinked, once, twice. His mouth opened slightly. The engineers stepped aside, silent now, glancing between us. You're the liaison, I said, yes. The words hung in the air like smoke. I wasn't told, he said finally, voice quieter. Now you are. And then I walked past him, toward the conference room, where the rest of his world was about to meet the part of mine they'd all ignored. The conference room smelled like fresh coffee and nerves. Pinnacle's executive team had filtered in one by one, filling the space with quiet conversations and overly practiced smiles. I sat at the end of the table, uniform pristine, notes open but untouched. I didn't need them. My father hadn't spoken since I entered. He took a seat on the far side of the room, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Every few minutes, he glanced at me like he was still trying to solve a puzzle that refused to behave. Then the door opened. The air shifted. Shannon Whitaker stepped in, flanked by her senior advisors, moving with the kind of presence that didn't require volume. She wore a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back, her focus razor sharp. The room straightened like a reflex. Chairs slid quietly, phones disappeared. Conversations ended mid-sentence. She scanned the room once, and her eyes landed on me. Colonel Morgan, she said, smiling. I didn't expect you to attend in person. I stood. I thought it was time. I'm glad. I prefer decisions made face-to-face. The room reacted, subtle but unmistakable. Heads turned. A whisper of surprise passed between two managers. My father's jaw tightened. Shannon crossed the room and extended her hand. For those of you who haven't met her yet, Colonel Elise Morgan is our military liaison on Project Aegis. She'll be overseeing compliance and final phase approvals. There was a pause. Not shock, respect. That shift in tone when people realize the quiet one at the table holds the real authority. I shook her hand firmly. It's an honor to support the project. No, she said with a small smile. The honor's ours. General Grant speaks highly of you, and from what I've seen so far, she didn't exaggerate. I nodded, aware of the room watching us, aware of him watching us. Shannon turned to the group. Let's get started. Colonel Morgan will be reviewing protocol structures and threat simulations first. Then I'd like her perspective on long-term integration. No hesitation, no question, as if I'd always belonged at the head of that table. I took my seat again. My father hadn't moved, but his face, his carefully constructed mask, was starting to fracture. His eyes kept flicking to Shannon, then to me. He was trying to reconcile the woman in uniform with the daughter he thought he knew. He was failing. Good, because this wasn't a performance. This was the job. And I wasn't playing a role anymore. I was the room. The meeting adjourned just after 11 on luck. Executives gathered their folders, exchanged tight smiles, and filed out in quiet clusters, their voices low but buzzing with something close to awe. Shannon lingered, speaking with her legal team in the corner. I remained seated, tidying my notes, letting the silence stretch. My father hadn't said a word. He'd spent most of the meeting still as stone, eyes darting between me and the materials on the screen, like he was trying to determine whether he was dreaming or watching his carefully constructed world come undone. I stepped into the hallway, letting the door swing shut behind me. The corridor was mostly empty now, but I could hear voices around the corner. Shannon's unmistakable cadence, crisp, decisive. Colonel Morgan's grasp of the architecture is remarkable, she was saying. She caught 2 integration flaws in under 10 minutes. Your division is in very good hands. A pause. My father's voice followed, quiet, measured. I didn't know. I had no idea she'd be the one leading this. She didn't tell you? No. A long silence. Then, we haven't spoken about her work much. Well, Shannon said, you should be proud. She's easily the most competent military liaison I've worked with. Nothing gets past her. There it was, the sentence that didn't belong in the story he'd written about me. I heard the shift in his breath, not a word, just that involuntary inhale you make when something lands too deep, too fast. I could picture him, standing there in his tailored suit, suddenly unsure of his footing. His boss praising the daughter he'd written off, the same daughter he once accused of hiding behind a keyboard instead of chasing something real. I didn't move. I let him sit in it. He had earned this moment, every dismissal, every conversation I was left out of, every family photo where I was an afterthought. I heard footsteps, slower now, less certain. He turned the corner and saw me. Our eyes met. I didn't smile. He looked down at the folder in my hands, then back up at me. You were incredible in there. His voice was quiet, almost fragile. Thank you, I said. A beat passed. He opened his mouth and closed it again. You're not the person I thought you were, he said finally. No, I replied. I'm not. I let the words settle between us like dust, and then I walked away, because for once, I didn't need to explain who I was. Someone else already had. The room settled into an uneasy quiet as I stood and walked to the head of the table. Screens flickered to life behind me. Project specs, defense protocols, live architecture layouts of the system Pinnacle had spent the last 2 years building. Some of the executives straightened, others fidgeted, uncertain whether to take notes or just watch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Let's begin, I said, flipping to the first slide. We'll start with a high-level walkthrough of your security architecture. Then we'll move into threat simulations. I've already flagged 4 vulnerabilities, 2 procedural, 2 structural. All are correctable, but not if you keep working the way you have been. No one interrupted. No one dared. I moved through the data quickly, clearly, calling out specifics without sugarcoating. I addressed the engineers directly, acknowledged the good work, and called out where it fell short. And every time I spoke, eyes turned toward me, not just with attention, with realization. By the time I stepped back from the screen, the silence was no longer awkward. It was stunned. A vacuum filled with the weight of perspective. I had just dismantled the foundation of their project and rebuilt it, verbally, in 20 minutes. Not with arrogance, not with drama, just facts. Clarity, precision. Finally, Shannon spoke. This is why we trust Colonel Morgan, she said. Her analysis is unmatched. Her authority on this project is absolute. Final decisions will go through her office. All changes, timelines, and compliance documentation will be reviewed under her signature. My father was sitting 2 chairs down, hands folded tightly in front of him. He hadn't said a word. I didn't look at him, but I could feel the heat of his silence. Not defiance, not anger, recognition. Across the table, Caleb was frozen, his pen hovering midair over a blank page. One of the engineers leaned back in his chair, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath since I'd started. They were seeing it now, not the girl who went her own way, not the daughter who skipped law school or the sister who still worked in tech or whatever, not the embarrassment at family dinners. They were seeing the colonel, the expert, the reason this entire project still had a chance to succeed. The room didn't erupt in applause. No one stood or clapped or gushed. It was quieter than that, heavier, realer. The kind of silence that only happens when the truth arrives, uninvited, and demands to be acknowledged. I closed my laptop. Any questions? There weren't, not one. Because in that moment, they understood exactly who I was. And for the first time in my life, they listened. The projector's hum faded into the background as I stood at the head of the table, pointer in one hand, the room's full attention in the other. I didn't rush. I didn't pause to seek approval. I simply spoke because this wasn't a pitch or a plea, it was a briefing. And I was the one in charge. Let's begin with the adaptive response protocol, I said, switching slides. As it stands, your current system lags nearly 14 seconds in threat detection across 2 layers of firewall. That delay is enough for a level 3 breach to occur before your network can isolate the signal. A murmur swept through the engineering side of the table. I held up a hand without raising my voice. It's not a failure, yet it's a vulnerability, which means it's fixable. They quieted. Here's what we're going to do, I continued. You'll reconfigure your trigger sequence to run parallel diagnostics, reallocate 7% of memory usage from UI operations. Yes, it'll slow the dashboard, but it'll catch the threat before it tunnels through your backdoor protocols. Across the table, the lead developer scribbled something down, then looked up and nodded slowly. That could work? It will, I said, locking eyes with him. From the far end, Shannon leaned back in her chair, observing the exchange with that small, satisfied smile she only used when things were going exactly as planned. I moved through the rest of the presentation with the same steady precision, calling out risks, outlining solutions, assigning tasks. My voice didn't waver. My hands didn't shake. I belonged here, and they all knew it. At one point, I glanced up and caught my father's eyes. He wasn't scribbling notes or glancing at his phone. He was watching me, really watching. His expression was unreadable, too many things warring behind his eyes to make sense of. Shock, perhaps, maybe regret, but above all, something I'd never seen from him before. Deference. He wasn't the authority in this room anymore. I was. By end of week, I expect updated schematics, I said, clicking to the final slide. Any delays will need to be submitted through Joint Ops. I'll be coordinating directly with Defense Command on system integrity. No one argued, no one objected. I closed my laptop, the click of the case sounding louder than it should have. The room remained still, like everyone had momentarily forgotten how to move. I didn't fill the silence. I didn't need to. When you truly own a room, you never have to remind them who you are. They already know. He found me in the corridor outside the executive lounge, just after the last debrief ended. I was reviewing a message on my phone, half ready to leave, when I saw his reflection in the glass of the vending machine behind me. He stood still for a moment, like he was unsure if he should approach or turn around and pretend he hadn't seen me. I didn't look up, I waited. He cleared his throat. He began, then paused, his voice catching on something unspoken. Natalie. I turned to face him. He looked like a man who had trained for boardroom battles, quarterly reports, and bottom lines, but never for this. I owe you an apology, he said. The words came out stiff, shaped like foreign objects in his mouth. A real one. I didn't move. I didn't rescue him with a smile or an easy out. You always said you were doing important work, he continued, not meeting my eyes. And God, I didn't listen. I thought you were being stubborn, or maybe just lost. His fingers flexed at his sides. I didn't understand what you were building, what you were becoming. I didn't even try to understand. I just kept comparing you to what I knew, what I wanted, and when you didn't fit, I assumed you were wrong. There was a long pause. His voice, when it came again, was softer. But I watched you today, the way you commanded that room, the way they looked to you for answers. You weren't just good at your job, Natalie. You were in control, and not one person questioned that you deserved to be. Something in his face broke open then, a crack in the mask he'd worn for most of my life. You didn't just prove me wrong, you did it with grace and strength, and without needing to rub my face in it. I finally spoke. I didn't need to rub anything in, Dad. You already knew. He nodded, a faint smile pulling at the edge of his mouth. Yeah, he said. I did, eventually. He looked down at the floor, then back up. His voice was lower now, almost reverent. I'm sorry I made you feel like your path wasn't enough. I'm sorry I didn't see you. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, sacred. For the first time, my father wasn't speaking as a man trying to lead or control or impress. He was just a man, a flawed one. A father who'd finally realized what he almost lost. I see you now, he said, and for once, I believed him. The building was quieter now. Most of the team had cleared out, the conference room empty except for a few coffee cups and scattered printouts. I stood near the window, watching the sun stretch long shadows across the parking lot, the same space I'd walked into this morning, shoulders squared, uniform pressed, heart steeled against decades of dismissal. It felt different now, lighter somehow, not because I'd won. This was never about revenge. Never about humiliating anyone or proving I could climb higher than the ladder they built for someone else. It had always been about something quieter, something steadier. About walking a path I knew was mine, even when the people I loved most refused to walk beside me. For years, I'd carried the ache of their silence. I tried to earn their pride until I realized their pride was never the goal. My own integrity was. Today didn't change everything. My mother hadn't said much after the meeting, only offered a tentative smile and a comment about how proud Grandma would have been. Gregory had stayed quiet too, still processing the idea that the sister he once teased for being too intense was now a colonel with final say over his project. But my father had apologized and meant it. That mattered more than I'd expected. Still, what grounded me in this moment wasn't his apology. It was the realization that I had stopped needing it a long time ago. My success had stopped being about their validation. My path had become its own compass, forged in missed birthdays, brutal deployments, and the kind of inner discipline no one claps for. I rested my palm on the window. My reflection looked back at me, shoulders straight, face calm, uniform still sharp after a full day. A different version of the girl who once left this town with trembling hands and a heart full of unanswered questions. That girl had come back not for closure. She came back because she had nothing to prove, only something to affirm. That choosing yourself, truly choosing yourself, might be the bravest kind of victory. Behind me, the door creaked open. Shannon's voice floated in. "Colonel, car's ready when you are." "Coming," I said. I took one last look outside, then turned away from the glass. As I walked out of the room, the weight I had carried for years didn't vanish. But for the first time, it wasn't mine to carry anymore.